Thank you for joining me once again. Reading something different today. Let me know what you think. Erich Fromm, The Dogma of Christ, and Other Essays on Religion, Psychology, and Culture. Like these other stories I've been reading, I've not read this yet. Chapter 1, Methodology and the Nature of the Problem. It is one of the essential accomplishments of psychoanalysis that it has done away with the false distinction between social psychology and individual psychology. On the one hand, Freud emphasized that there is no individual psychology of man isolated from his social environment, because an isolated man does not exist. Freud knew no homo psychologicus, no psychological Robinson Crusoe, like the economic man of classical economic theory. On the contrary, one of Freud's most important discoveries was the understanding of the psychological development of the individual's earliest social relations, those with his parents, brothers, and sisters. It is true, Freud wrote, that individual psychology is concerned with the individual man and explores the paths by which he seeks to find satisfaction for his instinctual impulses, but only rarely and under certain exceptional conditions is individual psychology in a position to disregard the relations of this individual to others. In the individual's mental life, someone else is invariably involved, as a model, as an object, as a helper, as an opponent, and so, from the very first, individual psychology, in this extended but entirely justifiable sense of the words, is at the same time social psychology as well. On the other hand, Freud broke radically with the illusion of a social psychology whose object was the group. For him, social instinct was not the object of psychology any more than isolated man was, since it was not an original and elemental instinct. Rather, he saw the beginning of the psyche's formation in a narrower circle, such as the family. He has shown that the psychological phenomena operative in the group are to be understood on the basis of the psychic mechanisms operative in the individual, not on the basis of a group mind as such. The difference between individual and social psychology is revealed to be a quantitative and not a qualitative one. Individual psychology takes into account all determinants that have affected the lot of the individual, and in this way arrives at a maximally complete picture of the individual's psychic structure. The more we extend the sphere of psychological investigation, that is, the greater the number of men whose common traits permit them to be grouped, the more we must reduce the extent of our examination of the total psychic structure of the individual members of the group. The greater, therefore, the number of subjects of an investigation in social psychology, the narrower the insight into the total psychic structure of any individual within the group being studied. If this is not recognized, misunderstandings will easily arise in the evaluation of the results of such investigations. One expects to hear something about the psychic structure of the individual member of a group, but the social psychological investigation can study only the character matrix common to all members of the group, and does not take into account the total character structure of a particular individual. The latter can never be the task of social psychology. and is possible only if an extensive knowledge of the individual's development is available. If, for example, in a social psychological investigation, it is asserted that a group changes from an aggressive hostile attitude toward the father figure to a passive submissive attitude, this assertion means something different from the same statement when made of an individual in an individual psychological investigation. In the latter case, it means that this change is true of the individual's total attitude. In the former, it means that it represents an average characteristic common to all the members of the group, which does not necessarily play a central role in the character structure of each individual. The value of social psychological investigation, therefore, cannot lie in the fact that we acquire from it a full insight into the psychic peculiarities of the individual members, but only in the fact that we can establish those common psychic tendencies that play a decisive role in their social development. The overcoming of the theoretical opposition between individual and social psychology, accomplished by psychoanalysis, leads to the judgment that the method of a social psychological investigation can be essentially the same as the method which psychoanalysis applies in the investigation of the individual psyche. It will, therefore, be wise to consider briefly the essential features of this method, since it is of significance in the present study. Freud proceeds from the view that in the causes producing neurosis, and the same holds for the instinctual structure of the healthy, an inherited sexual constitution and the events that have been experienced form a complementary series. At the end of the series stand those extreme cases concerning which you may say with confidence, these people would have fallen ill whatever happened, whatever they experienced, however merciful life had been to them because of their anomalous libido development. On the other end stand cases which call forth the opposite verdict. They would undoubtedly have escaped illness if life had not put such and such burdens upon them. In the immediate cases in the series, more or less of the disposing factor, the sexual constitution, is combined with less or more of the injurious impositions of life. Their sexual constitution would not have brought about their neurosis if they had not gone through such and such experiences, and life's vicissitudes would not have worked traumatically upon them if the libido had been otherwise constituted. For psychoanalysis, the constitutional element in the psyche structure of the healthy or of the ill person is a factor that must be observed in the psychological investigation of individuals, but it remains intangible. What psychoanalysis is concerned with is experience. The investigation of its influence on emotional development is its primary purpose. Psychoanalysis is aware, of course, that the emotional development of the individual is determined more or less by his constitution. This insight is a presupposition of psychoanalysis, but psychoanalysis itself is concerned exclusively with the investigation of the influence of the individual's life situation on his emotional development. In practice, this means that for the psychoanalytic method, a maximum knowledge of the individual's history, mainly of his early childhood experiences, but certainly not limited to them, is an essential prerequisite. It studies the relation between a person's life pattern and the specific aspects of his emotional development. Without extensive information concerning the individual's life pattern, analysis is impossible. General observation reveals, of course, that certain typical expressions of behavior will indicate typical life patterns. One could surmise corresponding patterns by analogy, but all such inferences would contain an element of uncertainty and would have limited scientific validity. The method of individual psychoanalysis is therefore a delicately historical method. The understanding of emotional development on the basis of knowledge of the individual's life history. The method of applying psychoanalysis to groups cannot be different. The common psychic attitudes of the group members are to be understood only on the basis of their common patterns. Just as individual psychoanalytic psychology seeks to understand the individual emotional constellation, so social psychology can acquire an insight into the emotional structure of a group only by an exact knowledge of its life pattern. Social psychology can make assertions only concerning the psychic attitudes common to all. It therefore requires the knowledge of life situations common to all and characteristic for all. If the method of social psychology is basically no different from that of individual psychology, there is nevertheless a difference which must be pointed out. Whereas psychoanalytic research is concerned primarily with neurotic individuals, social psychological research is concerned with groups of normal people. The neurotic person is characterized by the fact that he has not succeeded in adjusting himself psychically to his real environment. Through the fixation of certain emotional impulses, of certain psychic mechanisms which at one time were appropriate and adequate, he comes into conflict with reality. The psychic structure of the neurotic is therefore almost entirely unintelligible without the knowledge of his early childhood experiences, for, due to his neurosis, an expression of his lack of adjustment or of the particular range of infantile fixations, even his position as an adult is determined essentially by that childhood situation. Even for the normal person, the experiences of early childhood are of decisive significance. His character, in the broadest sense, is determined by them, and without them it is unintelligible in its totality. But because he has adjusted himself psychically to reality in a higher degree than the neurotic, a much greater part of his psychic structure is understandable than in the case of the neurotic. Social psychology is concerned with normal people upon whose psychic situation reality has an incomparably greater influence than upon the neurotic. Thus it can forego even the knowledge of the individual childhood experiences of the various members of the group under investigation. From the knowledge of the socially conditioned life pattern in which these people were situated after the early years of childhood, it can acquire an understanding of the psychic attitudes common to them. Social psychology wishes to investigate how certain psychic attitudes common to members of a group are related to their common life experiences. It is no more an accident in the case of an individual whether this or that libido direction dominates, whether the Oedipus complex finds this or that outlet, than it is an accident if changes in psychic characteristics occur in the psychic situation of a group, either in the same class of people over a period of time or simultaneously among different classes. It is the task of social psychology to indicate why such changes occur and how they are to be understood on the basis of the experience common to the members of the group. The present investigation is concerned with a narrowly limited problem of social psychology, namely, the question concerning the motives conditioning the evolution of concepts about the relation of God, the Father, to Jesus, from the beginning of Christianity to the formulation of the Nicene Creed in the 4th century. In accordance with the theoretical principles just set forth, this investigation aims to determine the extent to which the change in certain religious ideas is an expression of the psychic change of the people involved, and the extent to which these changes are conditioned by their conditions of life. It will attempt to understand the ideas in terms of men and their life patterns, and to show that the evolution of dogma can be understood only through knowledge of the unconscious upon which external reality works and which determines the content of consciousness. The method of this work necessitates that relatively large space be devoted to the presentation of the life situation of the people investigated, to their spiritual, economic, social, and political situation, in short, to their psychic surfaces. If this seems to involve a disproportionate emphasis, the reader should bear in mind that even in the psychoanalytic case study of an ill person, great space is given to the presentation of the external circumstances surrounding the person. In the present work, the description of the total cultural situation of the masses of people being investigated and the presentation of their external environment are more decisive than the description of the actual situation in a case study. The reason for this is that in the nature of things, the historical reconstruction, even though it is supposed to be offered only to a certain extent in detail, is incomparably more complicated and more extensive than the report of simple facts as they occur in the life of an individual. We believe, however, that this disadvantage must be tolerated because only in this way can an analytical understanding of historical phenomena be achieved. The present study is concerned with a subject that has been treated by one of the most prominent representatives of the analytic study of religion, Theodor Reich. The difference in content which necessarily results from the different methodology will, like the methodological differences themselves, be considered briefly at the end of this essay. Our purpose here is to understand the change in certain contents of consciousness as expressed in the theological ideas as the result of a change in unconscious processes. Accordingly, just as we have done with regard to the methodological problem, we propose to deal briefly with the most important findings of psychoanalysis as they touch upon our question.